Indian Nation, let's ride.
But Don Nealon's Mountaineers enjoy walking in where angels fear to tread. As the hills of West Virginia resound with the sounds of Golden Blue football. Here is Harris in trouble. Stiff arms. The would-be tackler comes down over the 25 to 20. Goes around about it to 15 to 10 to 5. A touchdown, West Virginia. He did it.
Takes the Slater one-on-one with the defender. Look at that.
West Virginia football. You know what that's about. They don't know what it's about. West Virginia football. Put on our table.
Let them know. Leave no doubt tonight. Leave no doubt tonight. No doubt. They shouldn't have played the old Golden Blue.
It is a great night to be a Mountaineer wherever you may be.
What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome back into the Country Roads webcast. As always, I'm Jordan Cruz. Today, we're going to do a little bit of a know your conference foe type of deal, get a good rundown on Baylor ahead of Thursday's matchup with the Bears. And to do that, we're going to bring in somebody that I know knows the team as well as anyone, a friend of the show, contributor to Baylor 247 sports site there, former host of the Please Bear With Me podcast. And that's how we got to know one another. So welcome in Baylor insider Scotty Swingler.
What's up?
How's it going, Scotty? Good to see you, man. Good to have you on.
Good to see you, bro. It's good to see you. It's going well. You doing okay?
Yeah, been doing pretty good. Good now.
Good.
Yeah, me and Scotty, we met way back. I think it was the very first year I started doing the podcast version of the Country Roads webcast, the CRW podcast there, and kind of been in contact ever since, going back and forth, each year trying to have each other on and, help preview the teams for the respective fan bases. So we're going to try and continue that tradition again this year and get a good rundown on this year's version of the Baylor Bears. So I guess opening thoughts, Scotty, Baylor, I think, is a team that's very talented. Obviously, we know that reigning Big 12 champs. So it's going to be a tough task for a Mountaineers team that's kind of seems like they're heading in the opposite direction if you ask a lot of the fan base, I think. So going to be a tall task, but being at home, I think, for the Mountaineers is maybe the one good advantage they have is a home Thursday night game, I guess.
Well, I've said for a long time now, there's three places in the Big 12 that freak me out, and I don't want to play there. It's Ames, it's Stillwater, and it's Morgantown. And Baylor to this day has still never won a game in Morgantown, even with some pretty talented teams that have come up there over the past decade. So you're right. The home field advantage for West Virginia this year is going to be huge. And I got to tell you, and all West Virginia fans, Baylor fans are a little nervous right now. We're kind of on the edge of our seats. You're at 3-2. And if you want to make the Big 12 title game, which I think most of us would have said was kind of the goal again coming into the season, you kind of have to win out to guarantee that spot. And so after losing to Oklahoma State, you had a bye week, and we hope, of course, that's been good for Baylor, but who knows what kind of team we're going to see Thursday night out of the Bears. Baylor has not looked as dominant offensively, certainly, as they did last season. And so there's a lot of question marks for the Bears. I can tell you more about that as we go, but I think this game's going to be closer than people expect. And it's definitely a trap game for Baylor, especially because Baylor has not fared well in Morgantown yet.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That's like I said, that's the one advantage I see going in, aside from the fact West Virginia is in like almost what I would consider a must-win situation for this coaching staff. Really, I think at this point, it's what it seems like through the fan base, because West Virginia fans are looking down the schedule and they're wondering, are we going to win, 2 more games? And especially these ones at home, we're like, those are the ones we got to at least try and get. So I think that's what West Virginia is looking at, as well, as hopefully maybe that can swing things their way a little bit. But speaking of this year's edition of the Baylor Bears, I think we know Jeff Grimes coming in. They have that power rushing offense, that wide zone attack. But to go along with that this year, it seems to me, from the outside looking in, it's kind of why I wanted to get your take on it and get a better rundown on it. It's still that power run game, still there's multiple tight end sets, but the personnel seems to be a little bit more speed based than power. A lot of fast guys on the field for the Baylor offense. What can you tell us about this year's version of the Baylor run game?
So as far as the running attack goes, you've got 4 or 5 offensive linemen from last year's team back, including offensive lineman of the year, Connor Galvin, from last year's team at left tackle. So it's an outstanding offensive line. Baylor came into the season without a for sure go-to back. You lost your 2 leading rushers last year, Abram Smith and Treston Ebner, both off to the NFL. And nobody knew who was going to step up and kind of fill that void. And it's been a true freshman named Richard Reese, who's emerged as the leading rusher for the Bears. He leads all freshmen in the nation in touchdowns with 7. Looks really, really sharp. Has also made a few critical errors, though, as a true freshman, missing some cutback lanes and some really crucial moments. But explosive runner. You're going to see number 29, Reese, all up and down the field, Thursday night. He's kind of the main guy. And then Squirrel Williams is another guy running the ball for the Bears who has been a weapon for the past 3 seasons, but can't stay healthy. He's staying healthy this year. He looks good. He's a good change of pace guy. And you're right. Baylor loves running those 2 tight end, 3 tight end sets and pounding it up the middle. In fact, one of the criticisms of the game plan 2 Saturdays ago against Oklahoma State was it didn't appear as if we leaned on the run game enough. We were almost too quick to turn to the short passing game. And a lot of Baylor fans are like, hey, let's stick with the run, pound the rock. That's what gave us so much success last year. So I expect a heavy rushing attack Thursday night. If West Virginia can't stop the run, I expect Baylor to keep going to it until West Virginia can get some stops.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured, Baylor to lean on that run. But West Virginia, the only thing is their pass defense has been a little bit suspect this season. So even the teams that are run heavy, it's almost like when they play West Virginia, as my dog's barking in the back. I think my fiance might have just pulled up outside, but I digress. He'll stop in a second. But I think that teams that are even run heavy on offense, when they see West Virginia, they may think, hey, we can attack through the air a little bit more even on these guys. And I know Blake Shapen's a guy that really has some good talented arm, and as a guy that Dave Aranda went to early, and I honestly wanted to point, I really respected how he did that early, so that it would give Gary Bohannon a chance to find somewhere else to play. I thought that was really good of him. But Blake Shapen, I think, is really a talent. And then wide receiver wise, you always got some speedsters. I know you lost Tyquan Thornton, who killed us last year, but Monterey Baldwin, I know that guy can fly. But what can you tell us about the Baylor passing offense? Because that's what Mountaineer fans are worried about with our suspect defense.
And Baylor's passing attack is what fans have been really unsatisfied with to this point. It has not, I think, when Shapen was kind of announced as the starter, as you said, in the spring, allowing Gary to transfer out, the thought was Gary Bohannon's a better athlete, was such a threat in the running attack. But Blake Shapen, a more polished passer, a baseball guy, so just a huge arm and throwing at different angles, reminds you a lot of Murray and Mahomes and those baseball players who turned into great quarterbacks. But honestly, the passing game has really not looked very intimidating to this point. I think a lot of it is there has not been many reliable weapons catching the ball. So Monterey Baldwin, who you mentioned, has been the one consistent home run threat at wide receiver, and he missed 2 games due to injury. He's you can't just have one guy, right? Ben Sims at tight end is a Jason Witten type, kind of just rock solid, always going to find himself open in kind of the short passing attack. But Baylor really needs another receiver or two to create separation and create target and windows for Blake Shapen, because just truthfully, Baylor's passing game has not looked that much better than it did last season, despite the change at quarterback. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, and maybe it's a good litmus test for Baylor, as you're saying, to go against a passing defense that hasn't performed well yet. Can you make some things happen in the pass game? Because honestly, to this point, Baylor's passing game has not looked as explosive or as exciting as we were promised up front.
Yeah, that's one thing thought going in, just like I said, from the outside looking in, I was surprised that they made that decision because I thought Gary Bohannon, I didn't watch Baylor too much outside of, Big 12 championship game, couple plays here and there. And then, of course, when they played us, Gary Bohannon, I thought he looked great throwing the ball. So I was like, all right, we'll see how it plays out. But, when I watched Blake Shapen in the Big 12 championship, I was like, okay, I see it. So then I was a little bit more like, okay, on that side, I could see why they would do that. But I think if there's ever a get right game for Blake Shapen, it's probably this one. So hopefully you guys have that to look forward to. But I wanted to mention anybody tuning in this live. I know midday, there may not be too many people on, but, we usually don't do it midday a lot, but, wanted to try and give it a little bit difference. I was off today, so I figured, get Scotty on right here, when the game's on Thursday, kind of short windows, got to do things when you can. But if there's anybody on, you want to drop any questions in the chat, go ahead. We'll get to those towards the end as we wrap up. But I wanted to flip it over onto the other side of things, Scotty, and talk about the West Virginia offense versus the Baylor defense a little bit. The Mountaineers brought in Graham Harrell in the offseason, brought in JT Daniels, and it's really improved what was a lackluster offense. And, as previously mentioned, those problems have kind of shifted to the other side of the ball. Can't seem to get both right in one season, it seems, but I digress. The offense improved a lot. I think they're fourth in the Big 12 in total yards per game, 454, if I'm not mistaken. And JT Daniels has improved the pass game. The receivers have had some issues with drops, but the one surprise up until the Texas game had been the balance of the West Virginia offense. True freshman C.J. Donaldson been a bright spot, and the way that they've been able to run the ball, I think, has been a bright spot. Of course, Donaldson will be out for this game against Baylor after suffering a concussion, but either way, I think if the Mountaineers had C.J. Donaldson or not, they would probably have some struggles going up against this Baylor run defense. Ika in the middle is really tough. I was looking at some PFF numbers. They're by far the best run defense in the Big 12, 90.7 grade, I believe it was. So what can you tell me about this Baylor run defense that I know has been stopping everybody's efforts to run the football?
I mean, you said it, Jordan. That's exactly right. Teams are only averaging 2.8 yards a carry against this defense, and it's the one thing that's carried over from last season's team that has Baylor fans feeling really good. Baylor's front seven is just stacked. It's really not even fair. Too deep on the defensive line, just playmaker after playmaker. Jackson Player, the transfer from Tulsa, backing up Siaki Ika, just feels unfair there in the middle of that defensive line. Also, some really good play from the edge guys. Garmin Randolph, Bryson Jackson. I mean, Baylor's front seven is just absolutely loaded, and no team yet has had success rushing the football on the Bears. I told this to the Iowa State guys too. I said, you're not going to be able to run the ball on this defense. And I think that's true for West Virginia. I'd be shocked to see a lot of good rushing numbers. The one, I guess I would say, wrinkle there was Spencer Sanders had some success in the first half a couple weeks ago on some quarterback keeps and scrambles against the defense. So, I know Daniels is not necessarily a huge dual threat guy, but a guy that can move. I don't know what kind of threat that would be, but that's the only place where Baylor's gotten beaten a little bit in the running attack. Otherwise, this defense is rock solid against the run.
Yeah, I was about to say the only way that West Virginia maybe could attack that is get Garrett Green in on some packages, hopefully, because like you said, Daniels isn't really too mobile. But I don't know if they may be likely to do it with Donaldson out.
Ask any of my friends how much I like Garrett Green. I'm such a sucker for that guy. I love watching him
we
play.
like him.
And he had some moments against Baylor last year. He had a couple of runs against Baylor last year that were so. But I don't feel like they've used him as much this season.
I think he came in for one play against Pitt and a couple, a little bit against Towson, of course, but that's it. They said, they've had packages for him still, but haven't seen him. But that's the one thing I was kind of thinking of with, coming off a bye week and, of course, C.J. Donaldson being out and knowing how the Baylor run defense is stout, they may try and do some different creative things. So if we're going to see him this season, it'll probably be some packages this week, I would think. That being said, like you said, I don't think West Virginia will be able to run the football. I said as much on our preview podcast, for this game. I think it's, going to be struggle. So to me, like the key of the game for the Mountaineers is probably going to be trying to make plays in the passing game, which is also hard against Baylor because they have that stout run defense with still playing a light box and committing bodies into the passing windows and zone coverage. Very tight window is going to be for JT Daniels. And the Mountaineer offense really last game against Texas, the receivers struggled with drops, and it's kind of been an issue. So that's something to worry about. We do trust JT Daniels, But what about the Baylor secondary, and how do you think that West Virginia will be able to attack them? And is there any chinks in the armor there in the secondary, I guess?
Oh yeah, I would tell you that's the biggest way any team has exploited Baylor has been through the air. Baylor's secondary is just young, man. There's one cornerback who's a senior, but otherwise it's a bunch of freshmen and sophomores back there. The corners have pretty consistently gotten beat on some deep routes. That's just young guys still figuring out how to play the position at this level. Baylor is overwhelmingly talented at safety. 3 or 4 different guys rotating in there that are really gifted. But mostly, honestly, more in the run game, more in kind of run stopping. Baylor forced a ton of turnovers last year, especially interceptions with Jalen Petrie back there, JT Woods back there. You're missing those guys only, and I'm doing this off the top of my head. I can probably find this out, but I think we've only gotten 2 interceptions this year. So honestly, Baylor's secondary is by far the weakest, I would say, overall unit on the team, especially at corner. Just some guys that, again, a year or 2 from now could be really, really gifted special players. But this year, just still trying to figure out the college game. I think you're going to see West Virginia be able to connect on some deep balls and maybe connect on some, if you can give the quarterback time, right, against that defensive line. If Daniels has time, I think the secondary can be beat. But like you said, the question is, can you catch the ball when it comes your way? And can you take advantage of those opportunities? I think that's a really interesting matchup to watch, honestly. And I think that could honestly go in West Virginia's favor.
That's what you got to hope if you're a Mountaineer fan, I think, in this one, is that it does. Because, like the aforementioned Baylor run defense, probably not going to, make any hay there. So you're going to have to do something in the passing game, be able to make those plays. So hopefully West Virginia will be able to do that. We'll see how it pans out. Because I think, with looking at it, how it lines up, these teams kind of line up similarly. If you look at the matchup wise, Baylor with the run game advantage, if West Virginia has a pass game advantage, both weak secondaries, and even statistically similar coming into this game. I think they're averaging similar rushing numbers, total offense. Records flipped around the other way, one on the winning side, one on the losing side. But when it's a close matchup like that, anything can swing it. And of course, can't talk about the matchups without talking about special teams a little bit. I know West Virginia has been a bit of a mixed bag. Kicking game's been really strong. The kicker hasn't missed any field goals or extra points, 100% on the year so far. Return game, not very good. Kick return's been bad. Punt return, they've muffed a couple. One cost them. One, the other team didn't recover. Block wise, they have been doing some things. Tipped a punt against, I believe that was against Kansas or Texas. One, can't remember, or maybe that was Virginia Tech. They tipped a punt against Virginia Tech and blocked one against Pitt. So blocking wise, that's probably been the strongest part of special teams. I know Baylor, they always got some great return men over there. But what can you tell me about the Baylor special teams unit this season, and do you think they'll have an advantage in that aspect as well?
So it's interesting. Dave Aranda, since he got to Baylor, has been very aggressive on 4th downs. And it has gotten to like a ridiculous level this year. I think we've only attempted something like 4 or 5 field goals all season. We've gone for it on 4th almost every time. And that includes, I think we have the best punter in the Big 12. And I'm biased, but Isaac Power is a senior who just consistently can pin you inside the 20 or can boom at 60 yards if needed. And we've hardly used him. So truthfully, I think it's interesting. I think we're pretty strong in the kicking game. John Mayer's current starting kicker is the most accurate kicker in Baylor school history with over like 3 attempts. And Isaac Power is a killer punter, but we just don't use him. We go for it on 4th. Some people love that. Some people hate that. I will say in the return game, Baylor's been okay. Had a punt return against Albany. Is that worth much? I'm not so sure. We did give up a kick return touchdown to Oklahoma State to open the second half 2 Saturdays ago. And I got to tell you, that game being as close as it was, that was not the deciding play in the game, but you look back on a play like that and you say, man, could Baylor have won the game if you just tackle the kick returner on that guy? So I don't think Baylor's been particularly strong in special teams. I also don't think we've been particularly vulnerable other than the one kick return we gave up against Oklahoma State. But I would not call it a position of particular strength, except for that punter position, who, again, we just don't use very often, if I'm being honest with you.
Well, if you get to use him against West Virginia, we'll be holding our breath with the struggles we've had of people being able to just simply catch the ball on punts. So We'll see how that pans out. But I think a lot of coaches seem to be going for it on fourth down more, using, the analytics and stuff, just the numbers say when to go for it and stuff. And Mountaineer fans probably a little bit jealous of that. I know a big controversy throughout this season has been since the opening game against Pitt. They had a 4th and 1 up 7, didn't go for
Right.
it. And that's
Right.
when a lot of people were out on Neil Brown from that moment. Yeah, so the aggression is definitely something West Virginia fans are probably jealous of. But that being said, anyone that's tuning in here live, or if you're tuning on the playback, really appreciate you doing so. Appreciate Scotty for doing us. We're going to get one last final little segment from Scotty. But before we do, just want to remind you guys, if you're in here watching live or on that playback, hit the like button if you would. That'll help this video's performance and help our future videos performances as well. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. Helps us, helps you, helps get more of this Mountaineer football content out to Mountaineer Nation. I know it's been a struggling season so far, but we're always covering it and always looking for the hopeful spots and hoping the Mountaineers can win and cheering them on it throughout the way. And we're always going to bring the coverage here on the Country Roads webcast of Mountaineer football. That being said, the next game in that Mountaineer football season that surprisingly will mark the halfway point of the 2022 season already, seems like it's flying by, will be against Baylor Thursday night, Fox Sports 1, 7 o'clock prime time. Mountaineers have played 2 primetime Thursday night games. They're 1-1, so I guess this is kind of their rubber match in those games, Scotty. But I got to ask you, what's your prediction? What do you think the score will be? Who do you think comes out on top in this one?
I got to tell you, I'm going to be optimistic here. I think Baylor comes out with the win. I do just think West Virginia's down this year. And it's going to be tough for West Virginia to get through that Baylor defense. I really just can't speak highly enough of what Ron Roberts and that side of the ball does for Baylor. But I think Baylor's vulnerable. I don't think this is a sure thing, especially, again, being in Morgantown. It's a place Baylor traditionally has not played well, has never won. And so I not only think this is a big game for Baylor, I think this is a huge game for Baylor in terms of getting that monkey off the back, getting the season back on track. If you can win on a Thursday night in Morgantown, you feel pretty good going forward from here. If you lose, I mean, who knows what Baylor's floor is if you lose this game and you're 3-3, because the Big 12 from top to bottom this season is just so good. I mean, every team in this conference can beat anybody, I feel like, except honestly, ironically, maybe Oklahoma. We'll just have to see about that, right? But Jordan, man, I'll take Baylor by like 10. I mean, I think it's going to be a close game. It's going to go down to the wire. But I think Baylor finds a way, and maybe like you're saying, in that passing game to connect with Monterey Baldwin, Ben Sims downfield. So, I mean, give me Baylor like 31-21. I think that's kind of what we're looking at here. But I definitely think West Virginia is going to keep it close for most of the game and put up a performance that I hope feels good, even though I know at this point a loss almost never feels good. But that's where I'm at, man. What about you? What do you think?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not too far off what you were thinking, man. I did the preview pod last night, recorded it, and going through it was thinking about it. And initially I was picking something like Baylor by like 14, just because it's been like that type of year. And I was like, Thursday night game home, I gotta think it's gonna be a little bit closer than that. So I think the Mountaineers will keep it close, but I think, like you said, not being able to run the football, that's going to be hard for the Mountaineers to be one-dimensional. They've struggled in the pass game, and just quite frankly, with what we've seen from this coaching staff, it's kind of at the point where I got to see it before I can believe it, that they're going to be able to bounce back and, beat, some of the top teams in the league, because that's what they've not been able to do. And so because of that, I think the Mountaineers keep it close, but I went 28-24 Baylor. So I'm kind of in the score range of you and kind of feeling the same way that Baylor's going to come out on top.
And it will be interesting to see, like kind of we talked about a second ago, the contrast of styles, right? Like I think seeing Aranda being hyper aggressive on fourth downs, preferring to go for a touchdown instead of take 3 against what Neil Brown's been doing all year. I think that will be an interesting case study, especially with Baylor being on the road, because that's a crowd that could very quickly get fired up if Baylor fails on a few of those fourth downs. But it's also a crowd that will very quickly turn on Neil Brown if Baylor converts a couple of those fourths, and then West Virginia is kicking or punting away on 4th and 2. I just think that's going to be a fascinating piece of this to watch.
Yeah, you're right. It should be, but and like I think coming from our fans' aspect, that's the part where we worry, because it's like if it's a close game and it comes down to coaching, we just don't have the faith right now. Like I said, we got to see it to believe it. And you've seen Dave Aranda, he's proven that he's a great coach, and Neil Brown, we see the things, off the field. The recruiting's great. He does stuff for the program. He's got the 5th quarter program, which is great for the kids, beyond football, all kinds of stuff. It's like he does everything right except win. And unfortunately, that's, ultimately the only thing that matters at the end of the day. So that's just kind of where the fan base is at right now, sadly.
Well, and like I said, I think this is just such a tough year to judge any coach. And I know Neil's had a few years there to get it together, but every year it feels like the Big 12 has some parity. But then in reality, Oklahoma was just winning the league over and over and over. And then in the last 2 seasons and now this season, I mean, Jordan, there's still 8 teams. There's 7 or 8 teams that could very easily still win the Big 12 today. I mean, and Baylor's one of them, but Baylor's got like I said, a short leash when you lose your conference game to Oklahoma State, second conference game. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out. But there is no 1 through 10 in the Big 12 rankings that would shock me at the end of the season at this point. I mean, it's just it's such a toss-up, man. So I would say that to West Virginia fans, it's been a tough season so far, but you could very easily not win any Big 12 games, or you could go win 4 or 5. It is just such a competitive league this year. It's kind of crazy. But I would agree with what you said earlier. Your best chance is to win at home. I mean, that's where it's going to happen for you. In West Virginia, Morgantown, that's such a legendary place to play football and a well-known home field advantage across the conference. So, yeah, man, I don't know.
Yeah, we're trying to keep the faith right now, but gotta find some wins somewhere, like you said. So I don't know. Hopefully at home, maybe West Virginia can surprise us. We'll see. But go to chat real quick here before we get out of here. Do got a couple things in here, and it's Cooz's Corner. Our friend Cooz here, Justin Cooz Walker. You guys know him on YouTube if you're a Mountaineer fan, college football fan probably. He says a loss at home would be terrible. Nothing good can come from it. And a 2-4 team, 0-3 in the Big 12 is just totally unacceptable. Yeah, and that's just kind of speaks to where we're at right now. And this is really a must win for Neil Brown almost. You want to say that, but it seems like every recurring game on the schedule throughout this season is going to be a must win for him because he's got to find a way to win 2 or 3 more football games. I think if he can get to 5 wins, they may keep him. 6, he's definitely getting another year. If he can get to 5, maybe, but that's where I'm struggling is just to find the win, Coos. But appreciate you chiming in. Any thoughts on Neil Brown and West Virginia, from an outsider's perspective? I know you spoke on it briefly there, but just as far as, do you think if West Virginia gets a certain amount of wins, they keep Neil Brown, or from the outside looking in, do you think they should give him more time?
I think you're on target, man. I like Neil Brown. I've told you that for a couple years now. He reminds me a lot of Matt Rule, who did such good things at Baylor before Dave Aranda came along. And by the way, shout out to Matt Rule looking for a job now. Somebody's going to get some college program's going to get a heck of a coach. He's going to get to go to any college football program he wants. But yeah, I think you're right. I think if you win less than 5, that's really, really hard to keep someone like that this far in today's climate, right? Because let's be honest, I think the leash for college football coaches right now is shorter than ever. And like I said, for some of it, the Big 12 is just this underrated league in terms of quality and in terms of top to bottom, how many good football teams are really there. But you're right. You've got to find 2 or 3 more wins this season, I think, if Neil Brown's going to stay. I think if you make a bowl game in the league this year, you deserve another season to see how it goes. But I know it's tough. And I know saying that to Mountaineer fans, I know it's hard where you're sitting. Baylor fans have been there, right? We've been through the ups and all the downs. So I understand totally, but
understandable. Yeah, that's what I said. It's the bad thing is going through this rebuild and now it's the 4th year in and we're expecting to see the wins now. And then it's oh man, we might have to go through this whole process again. But the good thing that I've been trying to tell people is the program's in a really good state. Like I said, he's done everything right except win. So whoever takes it over, and like you said, in today's college football climate, it's been shown that it can be done kind of quick. And I think that's one thing that's going against Neil Brown as well, is it within the same conference, you see Dave Aranda do it in 2 years. You're seeing Lance Leipold in a year and a half do it. And so that's really kind of going against him, so he's got to find those wins for sure, I think. But that being said, Scotty, I won't keep you too much longer. I really appreciate you coming on with us, but anything that you want to plug here at the end, go ahead. I'll let you have the floor. Anything you want to plug right here, or where people can find you and find your stuff, or anything
man,
about
just
Baylor,
man, I'm just ready. I think I think Thursday is going to be a fun game. I'm literally scared because y'all, I just can't. I was actually trying to make it up to the game this Thursday night, and it's just not going to work. I want to get to a game there so bad, but I think it's going to be a great environment. I'd encourage your fans, if you're a West Virginia fan and you're going to be at the game, like you could be the difference. I mean, and I mean that sincerely. Baylor looked really shaken up going to Provo a few weeks back and playing at BYU and losing that game ultimately in double overtime, in large part because what I've heard from every Baylor fan is that the home crowd in Provo, Utah was just so crazy and so loud. And we have Baylor's got a young football team right now. Your skill position guys, your secondary, very, very young football team. I think you can make a difference. I would just encourage you in that. Hey, if you want to follow me, I actually created a new account. So I do a segment every week on the Locked On Baylor podcast called the Pigskin Preacher. And if you didn't know, I'm a student pastor in my spare time. So that's my job. Awesome. That's my day-to-day job. So I'm preaching sermons about football every week now. And it's kind of funny and goofy and hilarious. And I hope not very sacrilegious, but just a goofy way for me to stay engaged. So you can follow. I've got a new Twitter account. It's at Preacher Pigskin. At Preacher Pigskin on Twitter. That's where I'm kind of blasting out my Baylor thoughts. I'll be shooting out some stuff Thursday night during the game. So would love to interact with the Mountaineer fans on there if that's something you would enjoy.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't know that. I'm gonna have to check that one out. I didn't know that you were doing a new one, so I'm gonna have to give that a go. Give it a look over. You said it's a Pigskin Preacher, right?
So Pigskin Preacher was taken. So I'm at Preacher Pigskin. The profile picture is a bear behind a pulpit. So you can't miss it. It's pretty unmistakable. So at Preacher Pigskin, that's me.
I'm gonna put it up there on the screen for him in case anybody, watching live wants it, of course, but then on the playback, you'll have it right there at Preacher Pigskin. And I'm gonna have to check that out myself as well. Glad to hear that you're, back in it a little bit. I know you were doing the podcast thing back when I first started, and then you kind of backed away from it a little bit. And then now I'm gonna have to check that out because I really enjoyed your podcast over there that you were doing for Baylor. And it was one of my favorite ones. Sometimes I like to check out other, of the conference, especially, during game weeks when you're playing them.
Thanks, man. Well, let me encourage your fans, man. So Travis Corley is still doing that podcast that I started several years ago. So that's called Please Bear With Me. It's still happening every week. And then I make an appearance once a week on Locked On Baylor. So that's a daily Baylor podcast. Drake Toll is a Baylor senior. That's the next, the next Joe Buck, the next Al Michaels. Like, he's just a stud doing that podcast, and he has me on once a week, and I'll be sure to tweet out that link and send it over to you guys. It's a bunch of fun. So yeah, man,
definitely.
College football, it's a good time.
Yep. In full swing now, and I'm glad to hear it. So definitely you guys check out Locked On Baylor. Please bear with me. I can, firsthand listen to it before. Great. And I can vouch for anything Scotty has his hand in as a Baylor insider, as he knows a lot about the Bears, and he's a great person as well. And proud to have him as a friend of the show, and glad to have him on today. And appreciate everyone that tuned in with us, whether you're tuned in live or you're tuning in on the playback. I love it. That being said, hopefully for a good one Thursday night. This has been the Country Roads webcast. And until next time, let's go Mountaineers.